Godišnje ponovljenje svečanosti, koje smo spremni da svetkujemo.
The annual occurrence of the feast that we are going to celebrate by reviving in us devout memories reminds us of the splendid deeds of our ancestors who, under the patronage of the wonder worker whose holy relics Kotor now honors, won lasting merit for the faith and homeland, bequeathing to us, their fortunate descendants, a glorious heritage.
Potomcima ostaviše nasljedstvo slavno. Dakle, građani, nek se I ove godine proslavi.
So, citizens, let this feast so dear to us be celebrated this year too with traditional splendor and customary rites, and let the same saint for whose sake it is being celebrated be an incentive to us all. In doing so, first of all, let us give glory to God and pay reverence and homage to the glorious Virgin Mary and to Jesus, his outstanding martyr, Saint Trippon. O great God, let this glorious banner fly for as many centuries to come as have passed until now, always in harmony, happiness, and love.
Minulo trenutaka razvija svake godine proslavljeni ovaj stijeg, a uvijek u slozi, sreći I ljubavi. Slava!
Glory,
slava,
glory,
slava.
glory.
The rugged rocks of Herzegovina and Montenegro mountain peaks command a magnificent view of a rarely seen beauty. Boka, a bay of saints and of captains. The inhabitants of this paradise-like bay have had their ups and downs. Life has not spoiled these brave people who engaged in many a battle, both on land and sea, against various oppressors, who, although many, never managed to break the audacious spirit of the Boka people. The geographical position and the size of the bay, which sheltered even large fleets, was an attraction to many rulers who left traces of their presence here. Father Brancos Butega comes from an ancient family that for generations has bred renowned captains and ship owners. Relying on a rich family environment, Father Branco experiences Boka as a specific religious and cultural environment.
Roditi su Boki znači roditi su u prostoru gdje su se preplijetali, preplijetaju.
To be born in Boka means to be born in a place where many strata of Mediterranean culture are intertwined and are still intertwining. What does it mean? It means that throughout history, the influence of various cultures has been continuously reaching Boka, from those of antiquity, Illyrian, Roman, to the Slavic ones. At a religious level, various denominations of Eastern and Western Christianity have been permanently meeting, clashing, or reconciling here. Also, the Islamic element touched this history with a rather strong influence. Therefore, it is an oasis, in a way, where a keen and insightful eye can read the destiny of this whole part of the Mediterranean, looking not only at its landscape, but also at its culture.
In the most beautiful bay in the Adriatic lies the ancient town of Kotor. It dates back to Roman times. It was referred to for the first time in the 7th century as a part of the Byzantine Dalmatia. High walls dominated by St. John's Church distinguish it. The walls used to defend the town against the Turkish army from land and against Turkish and Arab pirates from sea. Christianity in Boka is older than the oldest written records. In early Christian times, Kotor had already become a diocesan seat. This fact is corroborated by a partly preserved list of bishops from the 9th century. Today, the church is present in the life of Boca, although not in the measure in which it used to be historically. The strong Christian spirit of this region stems partly from a large number of saints who were born here or whose relics believers brought here. One of the most honoured Boca saints is certainly St. Trippon, the patron of Kotor. Trippon, to whom the Cathedral of Kotor is consecrated, was born at Samsada, a small town near Apamea in Phrygia, in the first half of the 3rd century. As a youth of 18, he died a martyr's death during the persecutions under Emperor Decius. Many miraculous powers are attributed to him. In 809, the Kotor nobleman, Andreas Saracinus, bought his relics from a Venetian ship that had put in at the Kotor port, and in his honour built a church in the centre of the town. There are very few written records about the arrival of St. Trippon's relics in Kotor. In his investigations, an admiral of the Boca Navy with a good knowledge of Boca's history came across a number of legends related to the arrival of St. Trippon in Kotor.
Some things are at first sight absolutely extraordinary to our modern understanding, but are quite acceptable during the Middle Ages. For example, a merchant arrives here, a local asks him how much for the relics, pays, and takes them. Now they start carrying St. Trippon and bring him to the town. All of a sudden, they cannot go any further, for he becomes terribly heavy. They have to lay him down on the ground, and then they realize it is the saint's wish to have his church built just here, on this spot, and that is how it was. This is, say, an element of legend or something. One of the captains made fun of the whole thing, but was struck stock still. Then they prayed to God to release him from this strange natural misfortune, and it worked. He was once again normal.
The first church that Andreas Saracinus built for St. Trippon was destroyed by fire in the 10th century. All that remained was the stone sarcophagus in which the builder was buried. The citizens of Kotor then decided to build a new church for their patron saint. The new three-nave church built in the 12th century was consecrated by the Bishop of Kotor Malon on the 19th of June 1166 during the pontificate of Pope Alexander III. St. Trippon's Cathedral, according to historic sources, is the oldest cathedral on the eastern side of the Adriatic. The monumental building soon became the centre of development in medieval Kotor. Special attention is paid to the main altar, the ciborium. This masterpiece of Romanesque and Gothic art was consecrated in 1362 by the Bishop of Kotor, Dujan. A silver-gilt palla on which saints are presented in relief stands at the altar as an ornament. This is the only preserved specimen of an altar silver-gilt palla on the eastern Adriatic coast. Partly preserved frescoes on the walls, works of Greek painters who lived and worked in Kotor in the 14th century, also speak of the stormy and artistically diverse history of the cathedral. The devotion to St. Trippon left a deep imprint on the faith of the Boca inhabitants. The Kotor people start the celebration of the patron saint at the end of January, with praises sung by the little admiral at the cathedral door. The climax of the 2-week festivities comes on St. Trippon's Day, when, in addition to the local people, a large number of guests arrive. The Boca Navy takes a special place in the St. Trippon Day celebration.
Gospodine viceadmiralu, odred starodnevne bokarske mornarice postrojene u čast Svetog Tripuna, patrona zaštitnika grada Kotora.
The institution of the Boca Navy is first mentioned as early as the 13th century. The Navy was the main organizer of St. Trippon's celebration from the 16th century onwards. As a representative of one of the economically strongest classes in the town, during St. Trippon's Day celebrations, the Boca Navy takes over the executive power in the town and has the right to propose amnesties and the right to grant asylum.
Gospodo mornari, podoficiri I oficiri Bokeljske mornarice, zdravo! Zdravo!
On St. Trippon's Day, the members of the Boca Navy, lightly armed and in festive uniforms, perform St. Trippon's collar.
Dakle, ako bi gledali kolo samo sa gledišta tog spoljašnjeg kretanja.
So if we look at the kolo only from the aspect of the outward movement, a monotonous musical and dance theme, it does not stir much interest.
Ono što mu daje posebni značaj, to je tumačenje figura.
What gives it a special meaning is the interpretation of the figures. There are 12 figures. It would take too long to elaborate, but it is a town and cathedral dance, and by the elements it bears, it must have been primarily performed in the cathedral around the saints' relics in Kotor. It may be that the relics were taken out in front of the cathedral and that the dance would go round them in their honor. In any case, with each turn the circle becomes closer, and at the end of all, mariners take off their caps and shout, "Glory!"
Kod tih, uslovno govoreći, duhovnih figura.
However, the point is that with these spiritual figures, you have essentially this. The mariners on both sides lift up their hands, the kolo goes under, and then slowly winds itself out in various forms.
Izvlači I polako izlazi gore, u različitim oblicima, varijantama I tako dalje. Suština.
Essentially, this is a medieval message. We go into the darkness of sin to come out into the purification of light. This is not only our specificity, but that of the whole Mediterranean.
After the Mass, the gathered crowd of the faithful accompanies the relics of St. Trippon in a procession through the town. The traditional procession led by the bishop passes by the Orthodox Church. At the church door, the Orthodox clergy welcomes the procession and bows in homage to St. Trippon's relics, displaying with this gesture an equal attitude of both faiths to the patron of Kotor. Beautiful Bay is remarkable for the number of its religiously inspired inhabitants. The Universal Catholic Church is richer for the number of saints born in the Boka Kotorska Bay. Among the first and the most honoured is Blessed Gracia of Muo. All we know of him is that he was born in a poor fisherman's family. At baptism, the parents named him Paul. At 30 years of age, he decided to take holy orders. After the parental blessing, he travelled to Venice and then to Padua, where he was ordained, taking the name of Gracia. Gracia soon became known by his virtuous life, self-sacrifice, penance, and love for the Eucharist. His admirers already considered him a holy monk in his lifetime. He was deeply devoted to prayer. He died in Venice on November the 9th, 1508, and was buried on the Isle of St. Michel near Venice. Christians soon started visiting his grave, praying, lighting candles, pleading for his intercession, which made his grave famous. Numerous healings and conversions are attributed to him. When, after the fall of Napoleon, the Augustinians left the isle, the then abbot of the monastery, Father Vyacheslav Montan, donated the body of the Blessed Gracia to the Kotorans. In the period that followed, according to declarations by local chroniclers, many inhabitants of the Boka Kotorska Bay and Dalmatia received great graces through the intercession of this saint. Even today, many silver votive tablets stand at the saint's altar as living proofs of answered prayers, intercessions, and help of the Blessed Gracia to the faithful. Prompted by these facts, Pope Leo XIII beatified Gracia of Muo on June 6, 1889. Janja Usanovic came to the Kotor region soon after World War II through her marriage to Boža Usanovic, whom she met during his military service in Đakovo. At first, Janja did not know much about the saints of Boka. However, the circumstances of life would soon change that. Janja's husband, Boža, fell seriously ill soon after their settling. Janja was desperate because the visits to doctors did not help.
I ja kažem, Boži, jedino će me Bog, dragi, pomoći da ti ozdraviš. Daj, reci mi čovječe, di ima crkva.
And I said to Boža, only dear God can help you be well again. Tell me, man, is there a church around here? And he says, go down the stairs and proceed as far as the post office. There is the church, you'll see, St. Nicholas, and go in. This is how I came to the church for the first time, this one. I went from statue to statue and stopped by this picture, just where this Blessed Gracia stands. Then I heard a door open behind me. It was Bonita, Sister Bonita. I say, Boža is very ill and I have come alone. He went to see the doctor in Tivat, who told him he has pneumonia of one lung. The other is kind of blurred. This is serious, and he cannot come to the church. I asked her whose picture this was, for I was curious. She said it was that of Blessed Gracia, a great intercessory saint. Whatever you ask him in prayer, he will grant it. And then I really asked him for help, praying a novena that Boža might be well again. You pray 9 Our Fathers for 9 days, and once it was over, he was well again. It means the Blessed Gracia and Sister Bonita cured my Bože, helped that he stayed alive, and that I could stay here in Boka, that there might be a few more of us faithful. What else can I say?
Ovdje, u Boki, da eto da nas ima malo više vjernika. Šta drugo da kažem?
This is not the end of the story of the Boka saints. In the Montenegro hinterland of Old Kotor, the first South Slavic woman saint, Blessed Ozana, was born in 1569. Her parents were Orthodox Christians. As a young girl, she came to Kotor, which at that time was part of the Venetian Republic. Katerina, as her parents named Blessed Ozana at baptism, was taken in service as a maid by the noble family of the town councillor Alexander Butch. In this family, the Blessed Ozana learnt how to read and write and received her first religious instruction. She had a special love for the poor. From her masters, she obtained permission to visit the sick and comfort them. Inspired by a homily in St. Trippon's Cathedral on Good Friday, she decided to devote herself to God and total solitude. Having obtained permission from the Bishop of Kotor, Trippo Bisanti, she made her abode in a small room near a now ruined church of St. Bartholomew in Kotor. In 1515, she entered the Order of St. Dominic. When taking the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, she changed her name to Ozana. She particularly pleaded for peace in the town, among the quarrelling aristocratic families, commoners, and landed nobility, as well as between individual citizens. Her contemporaries called her a Virgin Conciliator and Angel of Peace. She was gifted with prophetic spirit. At her intercession, God miraculously cured the sick. Owing to her Orthodox origin and her later life in the Catholic faith, she is considered the patroness of the ecumenical movement. Historical sources mention her great courage during the attack of Harudin Barbarossa, a Turkish admiral, on Kotor on August 9, 1539. Ozana encouraged the military commanders and common people to fight bravely, assuring them that the town was not going to fall into Turkish hands. After several days of siege, Barbarossa retreated empty-handed. Ozana died at the age of 72. Pope Pius XI beatified her. The small town of Parast is a symbol of the rise and decline of the Boka Kotorska Bay. In the 17th century, it had 1,500 inhabitants, skilled seamen and tradesmen. As they were constantly exposed to Turkish attacks and marauding of the Berber pirates, the inhabitants of Parast, few in number, also hardened themselves into skilled and brave warriors. The most beautiful pages of Parast's history were written on the sea. In spite of the extraordinarily hard living conditions, the constant conflicts with the Turks, Parast managed to develop a sea trade, earning the city considerable profit. Calling with their ships at the great European ports of that time, the Parast captains encountered the beauty of Western civilization. Upon return home, they were anxious to transfer a part of their experiences to their native Parast. The traces of the former might of Parast are today still visible in the preserved architecture of noble mansions and churches. The mansions of noble families Bujovic, Balovic and Smekya, as well as the tower and St. Nicholas Church, are counted as some of the most beautiful Baroque pieces on the eastern Adriatic coast. It is with pride that Parast inhabitants mention the great victory over the Turks on May the 15th, 1654, about 100 defenders with superhuman bravery repulsed the attack of more than 5,000 Turks. Locals attribute this success to God's help. Out of gratitude to God and Our Lady of Skrupiela, whom they consider as their patroness, the inhabitants of Perast made a vow to celebrate the memory of this victory by a solemn procession on May the 15th every year. A picture of Our Lady of Skrupiela is carried in procession through the town, accompanied by the Perast men under arms. The vow has held to the present day. The descendants of the former warriors remember the splendid victory with pride. In memory of the Battle of Perast, Archbishop Andreas Zmajewicz had an inscription carved in the vernacular on St. Nicholas Church. The Church of Our Lady of Skrupiela, patroness of Perast seamen, lies on an artificial island outside the town. Tradition has it that two Mortesic brothers, fishing around the cliffs of the neighbouring island of St. George, found a picture of Our Lady. First, they kept it at home. Then, one of the brothers, who was seriously ill, recovered. The people attributed his healing to the miraculous picture. The grateful citizens decided to fill in the island and build a church to be consecrated to the wonder-working Madonna. With time, the need arose to enlarge the church, so the faithful continued shoring up the stones and increasing the artificial island. The present church dates back to the year 1630. It was devastated several times by Turks and Tunisian pirates, but the pious Perast people would reconstruct it each time. Late in the 17th century, Archbishop Andreas Zmajewicz conceived a new decoration for the Church of Our Lady of Skrupiela, and for this purpose he engaged Tripoka Koljic, a painter from Perast, to fulfill his idea. The painter worked on Zmajewicz's plan for 10 years. The result is one of the most remarkable Baroque interiors on the eastern Adriatic coast. Next to the church there is a museum, housing works of art and objects which best testify to the maritime glory of Perast. Certainly one of the most touching exhibits is a work of art by Jacinta Kunic, a Perast woman who, out of her love for Our Lady and for the safe return of her seafaring husband, embroidered a picture of Our Lady of Skrupiela. The woman embroidered the picture using Chinese silk on a Japanese cloth, golden and silver threads, and her own hair. Her work took 25 years. In their battles with the Turks and pirates, the Perast people used to hoist the miraculous picture of Our Lady on the foremast. They made vows to Our Lady. Mothers whose sons were sailing on the world seas would decorate seamen's chests with a picture of Our Lady of Skrupiela. More than 2,500 silver votive tablets decorating the walls of the church bear witness to the prayers heard.
Bokelj je prepoznao da spustivši se na koljena pred Isusom I svim što ga vezuje za njega.
When going down on its knees before Jesus and everything related to him, the city of Boca knew it was not doing so in a cringing, sycophantic allegiance, but in the hope that Jesus, in his greatness, will recognize the honor and humility of this act and raise it to its proper height. Obviously, they did not make a mistake. For the number of saints born in the Boka Kotorska Bay, 17 of them were canonized, justifying such a philosophy of life.
Opravdao ovo osjećanje života.
The Boka Kotorska Bay grew stronger in the 18th century owing to an ever larger naval fleet. This development made itself felt particularly after the liberation of Herceg Novi in 1686, when the Boka Kotorska Bay towns established their own agencies in Venice, Constantinople, Smyrna, and Alexandria. The champions of seafaring development were Perast, Dobrita, and Pechani. At the time of the height of its shipping trade in the second half of the 18th century, the Boka Kotorska Bay boasted 300 large ships, more than 300 captains, and about 3,000 sailors. The small town of Pechani was especially honoured at that time. Its ships had the privilege of carrying mail between Venice and Constantinople, which they preserved until the fall of Venice in 1777. Believing that the region was going to continue its economic progress and growth, the faithful of Pechani decided to build a new church accommodating 2,000 faithful. The construction of the Temple of Mother of God started in 1789, but the Napoleonic Wars in Europe and recession in maritime trade slowed down its construction, so that this monumental building was completed only 119 years later. Art historians claim that this is the last large Baroque building in the Boka Kotorska Bay. Its splendor is made complete by masterpieces of renowned artists from the area around the former Yugoslavia, some of whom gained international recognition. Today, the faithful of Pechani go to Mass in much fewer numbers than those of 100 years ago. Božo Usanovic, living with his family quite close to this pearl of Boka, speaks with nostalgia about the reasons for the drastic decline of the Boka Kotorska Bay population.
Mnoga prčanska gospoda koji su zaslužni i za ovaj bogorodični hram, pomorstvo...
Much of the Pchan gentlefolk left or died out. Old houses remained deserted. The birth rate was low, no children. There was no one to carry on the traditions. If you go the length of Pchan, some 4 kilometers, you will find several of these mansions in a dilapidated condition. This is best illustrated by the last verse of a poem by Dominik Lukovic. The mansions are forlorn, falling slowly to pieces, and this exactly today, in these new free days. Only the church stands, your soul's reflection, and to the Lord I pray to shine on you the sun's rays. You see, it is so symbolic to say this evokes the good old times.
Boka Kotorska je u zadnjih od 1420. godine, zapravo i prije.
Ever since 1420, the Boka Kotorska Bay was linked to the dominant civilizations of Western Europe, starting from the Kingdom of Naples, through Venice, up to the Austro-Hungarian Empire until 1920. Then the war came, when we were annexed to Italy as a result of Mussolini's fascist, imperialist aspirations. And after the war, Tito's federative communist Yugoslavia appended Boka to its geographical hinterland. Montenegro, a republic with which it shared little cultural and political destiny during the previous centuries, except the little that neighbors usually share. So, after the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Boka Kotorska Bay and its population actually entered a less developed civilization system.
Smjestila Boku u zajedništvo sa njenim geografskim zaleđem Crnom Gorom, čime je ona definitivno ušla u sustav jedne republike s kojom je u prethodnim stoljećima dijelila vrlo malo kulturne i političke sudbine.
My own father could travel out of Kotor without a passport. He could travel from Kotor to Budapest, from Budapest to Lvov, from Lvov to Krakow, from Krakow to Trieste, from Trieste to Prague, from Prague to Vienna, from Vienna to Sarajevo, from Sarajevo to Zemun, from Zemun to Zagreb, from Zagreb to Kotor, without ever having to leave the territory on which his native house stood. I, his son, with the passport I have, can travel only 45 kilometers up to the border with Croatia, 120 kilometers to the border with Albania, and 200 kilometers to the border with Serbia. So the very scope of movement for a Boka man, compared with that enjoyed in former times, has been narrowed to unimagined proportions. To narrow the scope of movement means to narrow horizons, views, and communications. This has led to a disfavored position of the local population, who were used to wide spaces and big civilization breakthroughs. And the very decline of the Boka shipping trade in the 19th century, that is, the economic decline, at that time already put the population of the Boka Kotorska Bay on an emigration course, always going west, of course, in search of those values they once had in Boka, but which now are no more.
In the second half of the 19th century, a special grace shone upon Boka. In 1866, in Herceg Novi, a son was born, the 11th child, into the family of Petar and Dragica Mandic, who would become the future St. Leopold Bogdan Mandic. Following a strong spiritual urge that had accompanied him from his earliest childhood, Leopold Bogdan Mandic went to a Capuchin monastery. After the novitiate, he studied philosophy in Padua and theology in Venice, where he was ordained to the priesthood on September the 20th, 1890. As a priest, he resided mainly at a monastery in Padua, from where his reputation as a great confessor started to circulate. For 40 years, 12 hours a day, Father Leopold received thousands of penitents in his little room. He was distinguished by a strong faith, hope, and love of God. He had a special devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. His ardent wish was to become a missionary, go east, and work for the unification of the two churches. But his superiors did not accept this due to his frail health. The saint submitted in obedience. Only later was he to realize that his desire to be a missionary was met in Padua. His east was the penitent souls coming to his confessional. He also had a prophetic gift. Leopold Bogdan Mandic died in Padua on July 30th, 1942. Pope Paul VI beatified him in 1976, and Pope John Paul II canonized him in 1983. The Bishop of Kotor, Ilya Janjic, is proud of the Christian spirituality of Kotor and its inhabitants.
U ovom zaljevu svetaca ponosimo se sa svetim Leopoldom Bogdanom Mandićem.
In this Bay of Saints, we are proud of Saint Leopold Bogdan Mandic, of the Blessed Grazia, of the Blessed Ozana of Kotor, and we also have a handmaid of God, Anna Maria Marovic. They are all saints originating from here. However, we do not want to wear borrowed plumes. I always say that we ourselves should prove our holiness, not of the kind that raises us to the honor of the altar, for that would not be a true holiness, but rather we have to live so that we join the immense multitude that nobody can count, as St. John saw in his revelations. Then he came to an immense crowd that nobody could count, myriads and myriads. There, with our lives, we have to show that we are working for such holiness. The Church, too, urges us to speak of such holiness. Holiness for every man. No one is excluded from that holiness, as long as he's striving, no matter what his past was like.
In the northwestern part of the Virmak Peninsula, which, protruding from the Lovchen mountain, separates the inner Boka Kotorska Bay in two parts, is situated the municipality of Lastva. Its geographical position, mild climate, lush vegetation, and abundance of water made this region very attractive. The first inhabitants are mentioned as early as Roman times. In the late 18th century, the parish of Upper Lastva had 900 families. The creation of the new Yugoslavia and the imposition of the communist yoke caused huge political and economic changes in the Boka region. A large number of Boka Croats, not agreeing with the aggressive communist policy and lacking job opportunities, left Upper Lastva and went abroad. For those who remained, the communist trials were a heavy burden on the Catholic faithful. Today, for instance, in Upper Lastva, only 5 families go to St. Mary's, a church which dates from the 15th century.
During the time of communism, Yugoslavia presented itself internationally as a free society. The church, however, was persecuted and oppressed. Nevertheless, the faith was kept alive in the hearts of the people, because it was observed in their families. However, not much of the knowledge of this faith has remained.
Lower Lastva fared better and is today one of the more active parishes in the Boka Kotorska Bay. It has 486 Catholics, most of whom are regular churchgoers. The parish priest, Father Ivo Choric, although not a native of Boka, came to love this region about which he had learnt a great deal during his education in Bosnia. Out of this love for Boka grows his priestly motto: "Onto a wonderful land did my ropes fall. Very dear to me is my heritage."
Piety used to be very, very pronounced here. Church attendance, going to Mass not only on Sundays, on other days as well, was very natural. Then came a period when a regime offered paradise on earth. We need nothing, I am self-sufficient, you are self-sufficient, life is nice. What do you need a church for? You have all you need here. In this and many other ways, all kinds of things were offered. In all possible ways, they tried to, if not to shut us down, then at least empty the churches, and they managed pretty well. However, this paradise all of a sudden caved in and grew into, if not hell, then its forecourt. And the people started to realize, though not fully at first, that it was only an illusion and that they were being deceived. I know when I came here first, many family doors were closed to house blessings. I knocked at the door, they opened and said, "Excuse me, we do not want our house blessed." "Wait, aren't you Catholic?" "Yes, my folks were, but you see, I'm not in the habit of it. We haven't been for a long time, but I still come to bless."
Ivica Dekovic from Lower Lastva goes fishing with his son Srečko every day. While he was on regular pay, working at the Tivat arsenal, netcasting was his favourite hobby. Now, when the pay is as much as 7 months in arrears, fishing in the Boka Kotorska Bay is Ivica's main source of income to provide for his large family. He brought up his children as believers, although this was not an advantage in socialism.
Komunizam je čudo napravio. Čudo. Bez razlike, ja sam bio mali 17 godina kad su mi dali...
Communism was to work wonders, wonders without exception. I was a boy of 17 when they handed me carnations. I always opposed those crazy ideas, and that is why they always kicked me around and picked on me. Very few people went to church. Today is Sunday. Go to the church and I bet it will be full.
Garantovano će biti puna crkva.
In the family of Ivica's wife Brigitta, the Catholic faith has always been present. But
Kad sam bila dijete, nisam smjela da kažem otvoreno da idem u crkvu.
When I was a child, I did not dare say openly I was a churchgoer, but now I can say it without fear. I can say without fear that I am a Croat, that I am a Catholic. I don't have to fear, but formerly I did not dare to. At least something like that was always planted in us. For what reasons I do not know. That's how it was. Faith gives us strength to go on living, to fight. It gives us hope too. If there was no faith, we could not live, I think. There would be nothing to hope for.
Ne bi se mogli nadat ničemu.
the fall of socialism was marked by an extremely brutal assault by Yugoslavia on Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Although not directly affected by the war operations, it was not simple for the Catholic Church and its believers in the Boka Kotorska Bay to survive in those cruel times.
Pa, teško je bilo. Nismo smjeli da se živi čujemo. Nismo smjeli ništa da...
It was hard. We didn't dare to breathe. We didn't dare to say anything, let alone say we are Croats or wish to display something Croatian. We kept silent. We did not know, I for one did not know how to behave, who I can talk to, what I can say, and so on. One had to be very clever and think how to behave.
Vjera nas je održala punih ovih 10 godina, 12.
The faith sustained us for those full 10, 12 years. Srečko was born in 1994 during the war. I do not know how we could have survived if it had not been for Catholic aid agencies and Father Ivo Galic, a priest from our parish and Tivat. All you could get in shops was salt. You have to pray if you do not want to end up like those in Srebrenica or Vukovar. Maybe people prayed, indeed, to avoid such fate.
Nenad, the son of Janja and Božo Usanovic, was forced to participate in the war, although he did not approve of it.
Iskusio sam barut, što kažu, bio sam u ratu.
I have smelled powder, as the saying goes. I was in a war, in my opinion an unjust war, where brother went against brother. You see, I live in Montenegro. I had to go and fight against my brothers, for I have brothers and sisters in Croatia on my mother's side, which was very hard. However, I can say that I showed my courage to the Montenegrins and my faith to the Croats, for I never fired a single bullet at the so-called enemy, actually my friends, while I pulled 2 wounded Montenegrins out of an encirclement, and I'm proud of that.
Odgovorno tvrdim da kroz ovih 15 godina I malo više.
One can say that through these 15 years or more, although we were used to the pressure of communism, which was neither weak nor gentle, we suddenly suffered from the terrible pressure of Serbian nationalism. A minority is always a victim of a majority, not vice versa. All the more so because we are not a minority of the American people in Montenegro. Someone could say, minority you are, but with America you are a majority. No, We were a minority of the Croatian people, and in this respect we suffered very brutal humiliations and aggression, verbal, moral, psychological and physical.
I verbalnu, i moralnu, i psihološku, pa i fizičku.
The Boka Kotorska Bay is part of Montenegro today. Despite the cruel humiliations that it suffered during the communist and post-war period, the Catholic Church and its faithful managed to survive in the Diocese of Kotor. Presently, on 674 square kilometers between Igalo and Bar, in 23 parishes, there are about 10,000 Catholics. From the deeply rooted presence of the faithful here, a rich historical and cultural treasure has been preserved, which now requires urgent help to save it from total decay. The local church alone is unable to meet this task. One Catholic aid agency that stands shoulder to shoulder with the local population is the international charity Aid to the Church in Need.
We were only able to increase our help to the former Yugoslavia after the war. This region can be called the cradle of Christianity, as many deemed blessed and saints originated there. This is also reflected in the multitude of old churches. Nearly all of the churches need renovation. In parishes that are still active, renovations have already started. Parallel to the renovation of the churches, we have supported the development of evangelization projects. These projects are intended to make the faith come alive again, and through these projects that people may come back to the faith.
Listening to these stories and those of the father, of the grandfather or grandmother, to the stories of our ancestors, you will see that there was always a rosary in the house, a Bible, and various prayer books. Photos of processions, of the festivities that were going on. It means there was a living spirit. All that stays in one's memory, and that very spirit seems to fill you. It is good so, for it is a strength, a spiritual strength, which encourages one to go on, to hold out for such a way of life. It is to give the young, the future generations, an example that they have nothing to be ashamed of.
Thanks to the positive political changes occurring in the Republic of Montenegro over the last few years, the position of Catholics in the Kotor Diocese has improved considerably. People are able to go to Mass without fear. Cultural and educational clubs, whose activity was previously banned, have started up again. But is this enough to preserve the Catholics and their identity here?
The future of the Catholic Church depends on the political situation. Unfortunately, it is not yet stable. The Catholics in this region are mainly Croats, who are a minority. We hope that the coexistence of all religions and ethnic groups in this region will develop positively.
They will manage to survive in the measure in which Croats, as a minority population within the Republic of Montenegro, are recognized as a segment without which the Republic of Montenegro would lose an important link to the West, to European civilization. So this does not depend on the will of those who have this heritage and are a minority, because the minority alone is not able to manage its survival if the majority fails to recognize the value of what that minority represents.
Every July the 22nd, the faithful of the Boka Kotorska Bay gather in Perast for one of the few remaining maritime processions. As with every year, the parish priest heads the pageant of some 40 boats. In their boats, the faithful carry stones, which, nearing the island of Our Lady of Skrupiela, they throw out. In this way, they symbolically renew the ground under the shrine, reclaiming it from the sea to preserve it for future generations.
Što će biti u buduće? Nema nas puno.
What will be in the future? We are not many, and it is hard to remain here if you do not have a job. The overriding problem is an economic one, that is, to ensure for the younger generation some kind of job where one can make a living, live normally, establish a family, raise children, teach them the traditions, the culture, so that they too in turn can pass it on. This is the number one problem that we face today, and it is going to be a problem in the future as well.
While the oars, pulled by strong muscles, cut the waves, giving the rhythm to the song of Boka sailors, the question arises, is there a future for the faithful of the Boka Kotorska Bay?
Pripadam ipak kršćanskom duhovnom korpusu.
After all, I belong to the Christian spiritual body in which the future, no matter how responsible we may be for it, does not belong to us but to God. If we should be concerned about anything, then it is not some distant future but rather this day for which I am responsible, for in it I exist, in it I am.
Pa trebamo paziti da se ne osipamo.
Well, we have to be careful not to scatter, not to emigrate anymore, not to look for other homes. This is the home God gave us. This home, this Boka Kotorska Bay, which is so beautiful, that if those who left it had realized this, they would never have left. But for future generations, the Church will have to make an effort to stem this emigration. Then we will have to make efforts to encourage the faith. There is no living church if people do not realize that they have to live God in their own midst. Not a dead God, but a living God. For without this understanding, there will be no life here either.
Ne mrtvoga Boga, nego živoga Boga, onda tu neće biti niti života.